Hey class, how's it going? It's Dr. H. I want to take a few minutes here and talk about expectations for the final project. More specifically, just how I want you to turn it in and some things that are going to save you some time and energy so that you can get the most out of your time spent on this. No one likes to waste time. I know we're all busy. So, final project is a statistical analysis report. You've been working on it in these milestones. The main thing that you want to do for starters here is you've got feedback on all these milestones. The reason we're giving you feedback is because we sort of want to norm you into this thing that happens in academic writing where you're working with a professor or a committee to improve projects you're doing. So when I did my dissertation, I had this famous psychologist on my dissertation committee just giving me lots of red ink. Super nice guy, was super helpful. It was hard, but that was the way I learned to be better at writing and research. So the same kind of philosophy here at Southern New Hampshire. In each of these milestones, you've gotten some feedback from me, and it's important that you at least are looking at it and try to incorporate it. If there's anything you don't agree with that I've written, that's fine too. Tell me why you don't agree with it. That can start a little bit of a dialogue. But what I don't want you to do is just ignore it. Show me that you're at least going back, reading the feedback you've been provided, thinking critically about it, thinking about whether you want to incorporate that, or if not, a good rationale why you don't want to incorporate it. And that's, kind of mirrors the process that, if you're in academia long enough, you'll just kind of get more normed into that. So that's your first step here that I suggest, is just go in, make all the edits that you can make, and then that'll set you up as a nice foundation. Luckily this project isn't super writing intensive. You've got to do some writing, but it's not going to involve just ripping apart paragraphs and restructuring essays that are super long. Mostly we're just kind of describing data, describing our hypotheses, stuff like that. So go in and make the edits, and then you're set up great for the next steps here. You've got a number of elements here that we sort of built in over the milestones. Okay, so you've already done, this section on the milestone where you describe the scenario, you talk about ethics. You've done a histogram, you've done sample size, we've talked about sample size. You've computed descriptive statistics like this. In the next milestone, you did the hypotheses, right? So you've got a number of documents, and you kind of want to just zip those together. The course gives you this template. It's pretty bare bones, but it can be a nice way to maybe set this up and make sure you're following all of these little elements that are in the final project. So, whether or not you want to use the template's fine with me. You could even, if you like to, some people turn these in where they just leave the headings in. That's fine if it helps keep you organized. I don't have a problem with that. It doesn't have to be the most artfully rendered prose. I'm mostly concerned with content as a professor. So you could leave these headings in if you like. It helps you keep you organized. One thing I would suggest, though, is one of the common bits of feedback that I give to students is say more. You're on the right track, but you just haven't written enough. It's really important that you try to write enough to make sure that someone reading your paper would get what you mean. And I would consider writing this as though you were writing it to a friend that doesn't really know a lot about stats. That's a way that I kind of think about it. It's a good guideline. Just try to be thorough in your discussion. I think for each of these, some are going to be longer than others. But in the situations where, you feel like you need to write a little bit more, do so. So for example, this A, size of the sample, how will that inform your analysis? Most students in this course talked a little bit about, the document where you, in that milestone, talked about what a good sample size is, or how you feel like this sample size maybe would be something that would be generalizable to a population, or you feel like it's just small and not sufficient and leaves too much to chance. So those are things you can talk about, and it doesn't have to be really technical. It just could be informal, but you need to say something. Give me 2 or 3 sentences there. In other situations, you don't have to write much, like calculating mean and standard deviation. Okay, like pretty straightforward. So you wouldn't have to write like a book on that. You could just report the data and move on. So like evaluate the shape. Maybe you want to say a little bit more there. Talk about symmetry. Talk about how spread around the mean the data is. If there's like one clear mean, is mean the best way to describe the shape, or maybe is it bimodal? Okay, so those are some things you can maybe expand upon. And then down at the bottom, your interpretation of the data. You probably want to say a little bit more there, right? So you want to maybe tie some of these threads together, talk about the null alternative hypothesis. What do you think, depending on what the conclusion is, what do you think would happen? I mean, what results would be, worthy of future research, or what results kind of would maybe cause you to stop that line of research and go a different direction, or look at a different variable. So that's an area where you can maybe expand a little bit more. And, one of the things you'll find with academic writing is that once you've reached your conclusion and you've presented all the data, you can kind of speak a little bit more freely and even speculate a little bit, based on what your data gives you. A couple things I just want to highlight in this template that are a bit confusing or extemporaneous to the process. So it's all pretty straightforward through the first 3 sections. It asks you to present graphs. We haven't really done any graphs in the class. Like it's to me, it's a little bit weird that they're asking you for graphs. Well, it hasn't really been an emphasis. We did one histogram, but it's not really a graph. It asks you for a histogram earlier in this template. So essentially what it's doing is it's asking you for some other graph. I don't assign a lot of point variables to this. I don't want you wasting a ton of time trying to use Excel to make a graph to show your data. So if it's something that you want to skip, you're not going to get docked a lot of points on it. But, if you're trying to get every single last point out of the assignment, yeah, I mean, there's ways you could do, like, for example, if you're doing a correlation, you could do a scatter plot. If you're doing a t-test, you might want to look at, some other way to show the data graphically besides a histogram. And you can kind of think about what might be appropriate there. But it's really not necessary, and I've found this to be a little bit extra, so to speak, that if people skip it, it's not really going to ding their grade a whole lot. Another thing that's kind of hard for students to answer in this class is this last one. Would it be appropriate to conduct more statistical procedures? Well, we only talk about 3 in the class, right? We only talk about t-tests, paired sample t-test, and correlation. And in the correlation, we're determining significance for that correlation. So it's tough to answer without knowing a lot about other kind of statistical procedures that you might not know about in this course. I would encourage you to answer it as best you can, and usually ways that students answer in this course is just to say that, yeah, one kind of boilerplate answer that I think is always true is that it's useful to get more samples and do additional confirmation of any kind of research problem. Like they don't test diabetes medications on just like 30 people, right? They get like a big sample of people and they do it. And so, in certain situations, maybe it's helpful to have a bigger sample. In certain situations, you might think about, other ways that you could maybe just look at data or analyze data, but I don't really expect a big, I don't expect you to be like naming off different types of statistical procedures you'd never heard about. So you'll probably get to that in later stats courses that you might have, but it's more of just a thought question. So I don't want you to get hung up on it. Again, it's not one that I'm grading for more than like a point or two. Really where I want you to keep the focus is the meat of this whole project, which is that you're talking about a sample of data. You're talking about its limitations. You're doing a null alternative hypothesis. You're describing data. You're making a histogram, and then you're analyzing data and interpreting it. Like, those are kind of the main things I want you to focus on. Last thing I'll mention here is like how to actually turn it in. You're going to want a Word document, so that's one of two things I would suggest you have. So I would just go ahead and take all your milestones and combine them into one Word document. So you get all the written stuff on one document. And again, you can use this one. This one works well, and you can leave the headings in if you want. And then in addition, I would ask that you have an Excel spreadsheet that shows your data analysis. Can usually just be done on one page in Excel. We don't have huge data sets, so it shouldn't be too unwieldy. You've seen the ones I've been using, right? So something that looks like that. And then maybe if you want to include the one you did your histogram with, that would be good too. So what most students have done historically, some people are really like tricky with Excel, and like they combine the histogram and the analysis into this, Excel art. You don't really have to go that far. A good way to do it is maybe just one Word document, one Excel spreadsheet with your histogram, and then one Excel spreadsheet with your data analysis. If you can get those three things in there and they're rendered pretty well, then you've done like a pretty good submission. So that's what I would be looking for on this. And if you have questions as you get started, definitely let me know, because that helps me understand where students in the class are still having some questions or some confusion perhaps on instructions. All right, thanks for listening. Take it easy. Bye.